Well, hello, hockey fans. Welcome back to the Hockey Writers Live. It's Thursday, June 17th. We're into the conference finals. Hope you all are enjoying the hockey. Summer's coming up. The weather's been nice around here. Just hope everything is going well for you. So I figured this week we're going to focus on the San Jose Sharks for our whole episode. So a little bit later on, we're going to have some of our Sharks writers come on, and they're going to give their take on where they think the team stands and where they might go. But to start out with here, perhaps one of my favorite writers to follow. Goes back at least 5 years, if not longer. He used to be here with the Hockey Writers. Got together in Cleveland back when he was covering, the Kings and their AHL team, and they had a series against the Blue Jackets team, the Lake Erie Monsters at that point. And from there, it's just he's become one of the must follows out there, especially for the San Jose Sharks. So we are honored to be joined by Sheng Peng. Hello, Sheng. Welcome.
Hey, Mark, how's it going?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
Pretty good. Making me feel old there, remembering the 2016 Western Conference Final between the Reign and the Monsters.
Yeah, my God. I just feel like every time that we look up, someone else's son is making their debut in the NHL, and that's the ultimate sign that we're all getting old here.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
It's crazy stuff. But yes, Shang, I just wanted to start. Every hockey writer had to deal with the pandemic one way or another. And I know you
Mhm.
write for San Jose Hockey Now. Just can you share your experience on what it was like for you and what kinds of adjustments you had to make to your coverage of the Sharks?
But I mean, really not any different than anybody else, I guess. Just in terms of you got to get used to the Zoom life, a bit less access, that sort of thing. I'm
Mhm.
not sure if there's anything unusual that anybody else had to deal with. I don't think so, but I'll be happy when things go back to hopefully they go back to what they were. So today I went out on the streets, walked my dog without a mask for the first time in over a year. So that's
Mm.
allowed in San Francisco now. So, so
Wow.
that was different.
That is, I just covered the junior showcase that just took place in Erie that was developed by those four junior players, and they had no COVID test in the 2 weeks. They
Wow.
played many, many games. They were allowed to mingle in the hotel rooms. They had no restrictions. There were no mask in the building. They were able to go to the beach. They were able to go to the golf course on their off days, and they were able to complete with no COVID tests. Now there's vaccinations rolling out and stuff like that, but that's got to be a good sign. The fact that they were able to complete that event with no issues, and I'm hoping that that's a sign of things to come. We certainly all need it.
Yep, absolutely.
Yep. So talk to us about San Jose hockey now. Just how are things going with that, and what's all going on there for you.
I've been pleased that we opened the site in July. I've been pleased with just the reception from the San Jose Sharks community, the fans. Um, I thought that in a shortened season and with a team that isn't a very good team, to be honest,
Right.
that would kind of curb, subscription numbers and reception. And in general, I don't think it has. I think that people really do love the Sharks in San Jose still, and they're hoping that that team can turn the corner. And that's what Dan Kingerski, the head of National Hockey Now, that's what he kind of told me when he pitched me the idea of San Jose Hockey Now,
Yeah.
that there is kind of diehard base there that wants this kind of 24/7 coverage, and is still kind of dormant, waiting for this team to turn the corner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because that's a national network, sort of, right? And you got yourself. I think Kevin Allen just raised up in Detroit. Now there's George in Florida. You mentioned Dan in Pittsburgh. I think Jimmy Murphy's up in Boston. Adrian in Colorado. Is there plans to expand the coverage for you guys?
Yeah, there is actually. There is I think it's a secret site that's going to be coming up in a couple of days. I can't say where, but actually, if you
Yep.
go to Dan's Twitter, you can find the clues for the next site
Hmm.
if you so choose. And that's going to be another team site and more to come.
No, absolutely. So, yeah, well-respected writers out there. Sheng is one of them. So fans, definitely make sure you follow them. They're one of the more reputable places and sites to go to for when it comes to hockey. So, Sheng, let's go to the Sharks, because I tell you what, we could sit here probably for an hour if we wanted to, talking about all the different storylines that they got going on here. But I guess let's just start. For those that are kind of just tuning in for the first time, maybe that isn't a Sharks fan. They obviously didn't have the season that they wanted. I know Jones had a kind of an up and a very down year as well in goal, but just what ultimately led to them falling short in this regular season?
Not having a good team.
Yeah.
That's right. I mean,
Pretty
it's
simple,
usually
right?
not too more complicated than that. I mean, of course, it starts with the goaltending. If the goaltending is poor, as it's been for the last 3 seasons with the Sharks, that just sort of, the foundation is brittle. The entire team, if just sort of collapses, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so Jones wasn't so good in 2018-19. And the Sharks are still a very good team, but that team was good enough to overcome Jones's goaltending. It has not been good enough to overcome the goaltending in the last couple of years. Mm-hmm. But of course, all this stuff is all related, though. I don't want to lay it all on Jones. The team defense hasn't been good in front of Jones. Slightly better this year than last year, but still not very good. And so Jones isn't helping by giving up soft goals. The team defense isn't helping by compounding the soft goals given up by giving up a lot of chances in dangerous areas, and there's not enough offense. And so that just is a recipe for a lottery team.
That is. So when it comes to Jones, then I can, in my own mind, I see a couple of scenarios playing out where he can A, be exposed to Seattle. He could B, possibly even be bought out by the Sharks. I guess I don't see a scenario where he comes back. Is that where you're at with him?
Well, that's still a scenario that Doug Wilson seemed to lay out. Doug Wilson made it very clear in his exit interview that he wants to improve the goaltending on this team. And, you can bring Jones back as your backup, but, that's a very expensive backup, $5.75 million. And the Sharks don't have a ton of cap space to play with. They have some, but not a ton. I think their cap space, you look at cap friendly right now, you're going to see a lot of, minimum guys, better, rookie kind of guys who aren't going to be there next year. So if you start to cut off some of those guys and you start to form a, 13 forward, 7 defenseman, 2 goalie roster, the Sharks, I think, will have about, counting Jones's salary, about $7 million to play with. That's not a lot to work with. Nope. So if you buy out Jones, which I think is the most prudent thing to do right now, or when you can, then that cap figure, you still have to pay Jones $2 million. That's the penalty for his buyout. But that brings your kind of your free cap amount, free space to about 9 million, 10 million. So a little bit more to play with there. And the Sharks, I think, definitely need that because they have a lot of holes on their roster.
And not that I think that this would ever happen, but is there a scenario where you could ever see anything happen to Brent Burns? I guess from a, the way he's playing standpoint, how much money he makes standpoint. Could you see anything ever happening to him?
I think that if the team was serious about rebuilding, and that's not the word they've used, they used the word reset. If they were serious about rebuilding, moving on from his contract should be up in their list of priorities because you can still do it. He still is, even though his point totals and offensive totals have diminished the last couple of years, he's still a good enough player, still the number one Sharks defenseman in terms of usage the last couple of seasons, still plays all situations, power play, penalty kill. You watch him and he's still very much at least resembles, maybe he's not 100%, but he very much resembles the Brent Burns that we've known over the years. He's still a good player, basically. Yep. Maybe not a great player anymore, still a good player. So you can get something for him. And so if you're really rebuilding and you have a 36-year-old defenseman who is has 4 more years left on his deal, his game is declining, but still has value. He's making $8 million, which actually isn't a terrible cap hit for a number one-ish defenseman, especially when he was at his best a couple of years ago. But even in his kind of diminished form, is not awful by any means. So basically, here's a guy with some value, not a lot, but some value. And so definitely, he's a guy that you would move in that scenario if you were rebuilding. The Sharks, though, say that they are not rebuilding. The Sharks say that they want to win next year. And so in that case, if you want to win next year, it's hard to trade your number one defenseman pennies on the dollar. maybe not quite pennies, but he's a guy because of his contract, his cap hit, and his age. He's not going to get a full value that a number one defenseman that he would get if he was say 30 years old. He's not going to get that full value. So basically, you're trading him for half the value that he's worth, or something like that. And you're trying to make the playoffs next year, supposedly. And so that doesn't quite work out. And so if you're trying to win next year, it's hard to come up with a deal that makes sense to trade Brent Burns, I think.
Yep.
And I think that's where the Sharks are. So.
Okay.
So, yeah. So, I mean, of course, I could see a scenario where he does leave. He's still an attractive player, like you can expose him in an expansion draft. I think Seattle would think long and hard about it. Just for in comparison, you could expose Erik Carlson. Not that you could, because he has an MMC, but if you did expose Erik Carlson, Seattle would not think a second about that. So.
Right. Yeah,
so
it's obvious.
give you an idea of where those two guys are, So.
Exactly right. So one more goaltending question before we move on. So
now let's not talk about Sharks goaltending anymore, please. Now.
I know, right? Seems like a sort of, I guess, is there an alternative? Like, is there a plan? Like, is that just kind of reading up? It seems like, because of the expansion draft, because of who might be available, it seems like they have a bevy of options. The last time they went to the Devin Dubnyk route, I would feel like they'd want to look at something a little bit longer term. Is there anything that sticks out to you?
No, not really in terms of what they're looking for. I think any option that they're looking for, I would suspect that they're not looking to make a long-term commitment to anybody, because I don't think they want to get caught in too many more long-term contracts, especially with somebody they're not sure about. And so if you look at the goalies who are out there, who are you sure about that you want to give 5-6 years to? Tuukka Rask is a very good goalie, but he is going back to Boston. And also, too, he's 34 anyway. So even if you wanted to leave Boston, you're not signing him to a long term. Grubauer is younger, and Grubauer, of course, is a Vezina finalist this year. But again, though, Grubauer has his questions, too. He's had a lot of injuries. Of course, he wasn't very good in the second half of that Vegas-Colorado series. So he is probably the best candidate out there for a long-term deal. But if you're not sold by him, then there is no one else out there that you would kind of make that long-term commitment to. So I assume that they will go after. I assume it makes the most sense that they buy out Jones and they add at least one of. There are a lot of because of expansion and in free agency, there are a lot of 1B goalies out there. Mrazek's the name that a lot of Sharks fans have talked about. Drieger, of course. And so on, or teams like your Blue Jackets, right, that have a couple goalies and might be in the market to trade one before the expansion draft. So there's going to be a lot of kind of goalies of that type, guys that there's only a handful of guys like your Hellebucks or that Carey Price or whoever that you feel very good about as your surefire number one, and there's like. There's a few of those guys, maybe a dozen, I don't know. And then there's like 20 or so guys who are like, well, hopefully they have a good year this year.
Exactly.
And so I think that's who the Sharks will be looking for, some improvement over that. And there are a lot of guys like that. And so, hopefully for the fan base that they pick right this time.
Exactly right. And now we can get off the goaltending subject once and for all.
Thank goodness.
And it's Sheng Peng from San Jose Hockey Now joining us here on the Hockey Writers Live. So I'm going a little bit of a different direction with this one. Is there any way that the San Jose Sharks can still win the Barclay Gudro deal?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they got a first round pick out of it, and Ozzy Weisblatt, and Ozzy Weisblatt's yet to play an NHL game. And so who knows, Ozzy Weisblatt, if he's, Patrick Marlow, then he won that deal, right? And It's not as if trading Barclay Goodrow lost the Sharks a Stanley Cup or a playoff berth or anything like that, right? And so Barclay Goodrow is a very good player, underrated, underrated so much that right now he's overrated actually now, where people are like, whoa, the Sharks should have kept him and not taken a first round pick. I mean, I don't know what the point of keeping Barclay Goodrow for this Sharks team that hasn't been very good the last couple of years. If someone's offering a first round pick, I think that's still a deal that you do. Barclay Goodrow's a good player, but ultimately, like, he's a guy you can find out there. So that would be my argument for that. Whereas your first round pick, of course, he can fail and bust and he won't be any good. But that's a lottery ticket for someone that could change your franchise.
That's a risky to be willing to take. The reason I asked that question is because looking at them, it seems like one of the obvious holes that the Sharks have is down the lineup, especially at center ice. You think could Gudro have played that, but you kind of laid that out well. I guess my question is, how do you feel like that the Sharks will try to address the center ice position?
That is, Doug Wilson laid out two priorities for this offseason, the goaltending and adding a third line center. So, of course, funny that you mentioned Gudro. I do think of Gudro as more of a fourth liner, though. I know that he is playing third line wing for Tampa Bay right now, but I think it helps him that he's playing with Yanni Gourde and Blake Coleman. So, yeah, I don't know if I like Gudro as sort of your number one guy on your third line, which is actually what he was doing for San Jose before they traded him to Tampa Bay, and he was doing okay at it. But the Sharks, like you said, weren't going anywhere with him. Right. So anyway, I would guess that once again that it so happens that this UFA market, just like it is for goalies, for centers, especially a middle six, third line centers, there's a ton of guys available. And so there's, it's probably half dozen to dozen pretty good candidates out there of a different cost. Guys from, more expensive like Nugent Hopkins, who's probably more of a second liner, or a Dano, all the way down to, you want to take a chance on Brandon Sutter or Derek Ryan or somebody like that. There's a lot of guys out there. And in the middle, there's a ton of guys, Howla, Bozak, guys like that, Bonino, that you feel pretty good with as your 3C. And so I'm going to guess that that's where the Sharks go. And they probably look more in that middle area, the middle of the pack of the guys that we're talking about, guys like Howla, guys who are more affordable. I don't think they'll be able to afford a Dano or, probably not a Granlund either. That would be quite nice for their team. But anyway, that's where I see them going, trying to establish a third line center, a guy that can bring some offense. But also, too, Doug Wilson said a lot in his exit interview. He talked about Logan Couture this year and Tommy Hertl this year, but especially Couture. The Sharks really didn't have a viable third-line center this year. They had to go with Dylan Gambrell, and, he did his best, but he is probably more of a fourth-line center in the end. And so you're basically, miscasting. It's not fair to him, actually. You're asking a guy who's more of a 4C to play 3C for you all year. And so anyway, with Couture, they gave Couture a lot of defensive zone starts, that sort of thing, a lot of the heavy lifting. And Wilson said he didn't want to do that this year or this, next, or he didn't want to do that next year. I'm not sure why he didn't address it this last offseason, but that's something that I've talked a lot about in my articles. But anyway, though, so I think that they're going to look for somebody who can add some offense, but is probably more defensively oriented, though. That'd be my guess. Okay. So, maybe a guy like a Bozak or Bonino might fit in there pretty well. Just for example, just that kind of class of guy, though.
Yeah, you laid it out. I mean, there's several candidates that they could do. That's what makes it interesting, the number of different directions that they could go. So I guess got three more for you here. I guess they did have a recent signing that I'm curious about. They think has a little bit of implication, especially when it talks about Seattle. Jonathan Dowling, can you kind of give everybody a sense of just who he is and what he could possibly bring to the Sharks?
Sure. A couple of years ago, Jonathan Dowling was one of the top prospects in the world. He was drafted by, I think, Ottawa, right, and traded to Vancouver. If I have that part right. But anyway, he was with Vancouver, and he's a friend of Elias Pettersson. And I think a lot of Canucks fans were looking at that duel as, going to be something that they were going to build their team around, that sort of thing. So Dowling came over. He had a rough year in Utica. That was Vancouver's AHL affiliate at the time. And anyway, they traded Dowling to the Sharks at the end of 2019 trade deadline for a relatively minor prospect, Linus Carlson. I think a Sharks 4th round pick a few years back. And anyway, Dowling played just 7 games to close that season with the Barracuda. He got a concussion and he went back to Sweden. And anyway, at that point, most guys, they play AHL that 1 year, maybe their star has fallen a little bit. He's a more of an offensive oriented guy, and he wasn't producing in his first pro year in North America. He wasn't producing quite at the clip that I think the Vancouver Brass or Vancouver fans were hoping for. And so anyway, you have that kind of tough year. You get traded to San Jose, you get a concussion. You figure that your next step is either you come back and you challenge for an NHL job, you play in the AHL, you pay your dues, right? That's one of your likely options, right? The other likely option is to play in the SHL, being from Sweden and all of that, or, another top professional league like the KHL or something like that. So Dowling went in an interesting, different direction. He joined his club from his early days in Sweden, Timrå. And Timrå was in Allsvenskan, which is a Swedish second division. And he proceeded to, in 2019-20, to dominate that league, the Swedish second division. And he was on the way to leading Timrå out of relegation and into the SHL, which was his stated goal that season, that he wanted to lead Timrå out of there and then come back to North America and try again. Of course, last season, around March, that's when COVID, everything got shut down and whatever. So the Allsvenskan season did not finish. And so Dowling did not get a chance to take Timrå to the SHL in 2019-20. So now we have 2021, and of course the NHL season didn't get started until January. And so I'm not sure if the NHL season had started regularly, 2020-21, if Dowling might have come over at that point. But because there was so much uncertainty, and because Dowling himself wanted to take a Timrå, he wanted a chance to lead Timrå to the SHL. Mm-hmm. The Sharks let him start the season in Timrå, and that's where he played the entire season. And he's scoring at a 1.5 clip or so, dominating second division Swedish hockey again. Anyway, so and he did ultimately lead Timrå to the SHL, and he will be coming to the Sharks, and it's a one-way deal. And the Sharks will have to protect him in the expansion draft, so that's going to be one of their slots. And that most assuredly means that they're going to go. I think we all kind of knew it would go in this direction, but it's most assuredly they're going to go 7-3-1, 7 forwards, 3 defensemen.
And that's you segued perfectly in, as I was going to go there next. I tend to agree, and I looked at it coming in with Dowling being one of the ones that have to be protected.
Yeah.
I mean, the 5 obvious ones coming in outside of that to me were Couture, Hurdle, Kane, Meyer, and LeBanc. And I guess maybe you include Rudolph Balcers in that conversation for forwards. Mm-hmm. So you leave Gambrell, Matt Nieto, and then as possibly being exposed. The 3 would be Carlson, Mark-Edward Vlasic, and Brent Burns. Mm-hmm. And Radim Šimić would be somebody who would be exposed there as well. Is that kind of what you're seeing, as well as what might be available for Seattle?
Yeah, basically. You have the 5 forwards who are signed to longer contracts, established guys. I think Balcers is definite. I think he impressed everybody last season, so he's a definite will be protected, at least one spot. And if Dowling hadn't needed to be protected, then maybe that would have been Gambrell. But since Dowling needs to be protected, and I think that they want to see what they've got here. Just to finish the thought about Dowling, we're not sure what he's going to be, because he's played at, relatively low level competition the last couple of years. We know that there's a lot of offensive promise with him, a lot of talent, a lot of creativity with him. The same things that made prospects, watchers fall in love with him a couple of years ago are still there with him. But, is he going to be strong enough? Is he going to be quick enough for the NHL? I think those are very serious questions. He also is the kind of guy, too, that if he's not in a scoring role in the NHL, I don't think he's going to have a lot of value. And so if he can't make an immediate impact with the Sharks, then, he's the kind of guy I can see going back to Sweden, after next season pretty quickly if things don't work out for him. But anyway, that's the kind of guy he kind of profiles as. So if basically for the Sharks, if he hits, it's going to be a tremendous hit, because you're going to be paying a guy, at minimum, who, is going to be a middle 6 contributor, help you on a power play. And if he busts, well, you didn't really give up too much, be it the guy you protected over him in expansion draft, or his 1-year minimum contract. So it's a pretty good gamble for the Sharks, I think. So we'll see what Dowling's got. And just in terms of expansion draft setup, yeah, I think that's going to be pretty much right. There was, I think, some debate among the Sharks fan base last offseason about, hey, maybe we should protect Scheig. Scheig did impress in his rookie season, 2018-19, playing with Brent Burns. But Scheig hasn't been able to put together a consistent kind of a body of work since then. And his contract is a bit much for a bottom pairing defenseman for sure. So I think he probably ends up back with the Sharks because I don't see any reason for Seattle to take him. But I would think he's the one exposed, and for sure they're going to expose Jones. But there's no reason in God's green earth for Seattle to pick up.
Yep. Yeah. Well, one last question for you, Sheng, and I look at the division you guys are in. I know the Kings and the Ducks are long rumored to try to make a big splash this season, whether it be Seth Jones, whether it be Jack Eichel, whatever it is. It seems like that there's an opportunity to make the top four. With that said, is there a path for the Sharks to make a legitimate playoff run next season in your mind?
Yeah, I think there is, but it's contingent on things that we've seen decline for the last couple of years. Erik Karlsson's still going to be here, but his game keeps declining. Mark Edward Vlasic's still going to be here, but his game is also has been in decline too. Can they stop that in some sort of way? I don't want to say no, just because these guys are some of the greats of the 2010s. Some of the greats of our generation. So I don't want to take away. These are once truly fantastic, great players, and so. Can they find, a bit of that game? Maybe they can. It was a weird season this last year. Shortened season, tough to be away from family, et cetera. So maybe they can. But obviously, though, we've seen a trend line the last couple of years. So probably not. But who knows though? I don't think. There's a big space between being as great as say Erik Karlsson was to being a guy who doesn't belong in the NHL anymore. Right. And so, maybe Carlson can find a better space, still be a really good player. Same goes with Vlasic. Maybe Burns can hold his game, keep that afloat. So with the division being as weak as it is, certainly I can see them in the playoffs. I don't know. It's not, it's not a team that anyone would mistaken for a cup contender, but you have a few that happened a little bit. You have a better goaltending, a more consistent goaltending from right. Somewhere, anywhere. You pick up a solid third line center, and maybe a winger, a couple of your younger wingers who showed some promise the last couple of years, be it Balzers or Barrett Bonoff or John Leonard or Noel Gregor. They start to really cement their position as legitimate middle six forwards and not just middle six forwards on a bad team. All these things are very possible. Will they happen? I don't know. And they haven't happened the last couple of years. But it's possible. Yeah.
Only time will tell. And as I said, it'll be very interesting to see how Wilson handles the offseason. Sheng, this was wonderful. Fans, make sure you follow him on Twitter at Sheng_Peng and get a subscription too. He does a really good job with the San Jose Sharks. Sheng, we really appreciate you taking the time to join us here on the Hockey Writers Live.
Thanks a bunch, Mark. I'll talk to you soon.
Appreciate that. And fans, stay tuned. Part 2 will be coming up. We're going to continue our Sharks conversation, so stay tuned. All right, fans, welcome back. We are now at part 2 of the Hockey Writers Live for June 17th, 2021. I'm your host, Mark Scheig, and Sheng just joined us for the first part of our San Jose Sharks conversation, as good as it gets out there. Very knowledgeable, very close to the team, just does great work. We really appreciate his time. Before we get into part 2 here, I just want to throw a plug and just make sure you guys are hitting that like button on Facebook, hitting subscribe on YouTube, on Instagram, on all of our different platforms. We have the audio version of this available. We have this out here on video that's going to show up on YouTube or however you want to watch it. But not just me, we have a lot of other shows too, just besides this one. Like if you like your news and rumors, if you like different teams like the Blackhawks, the Red Wings, the Sabres, the Flames, the Leafs, the Oilers, We have shows for you there as well. We also have an all-female show called Chicks and Sticks, and we also have several other podcasts. So make sure that you subscribe to all of them. And if you want to see the full list, you can go to our website, thehockeywriters.com. And on the left-hand side, there's a link to all of our shows, so don't miss them. We produce them every week, so you'll have always something to do if you're looking for a hockey fix. So that said, we are now going to introduce our Sharks panel. We're going to continue this conversation that we started in part one. So we have Victor Nuno, we have Lizz Child, and we have Josh Frojelin joining us. Hello, everybody.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Thank you. Yeah,
I appreciate all of you joining us here. So Victor, we'll start with you on this one. I know a lot of fans are interested in the Sharks from the outside because, let's face it, they weren't a very good team at all this past year, for one reason or another. But if you can just kind of fill everybody in on maybe the why were they not so good, and then was there something that was good that came out of it, and then maybe one of your worst fears that came out of this season for the Sharks?
Yeah, there was so much to choose from here. I think the youth getting a chance to shine, and the team being bad, a lot of the young players were able to make their debut. That was pleasant to see. I think some of us would have liked to see some of the younger players a little more, like Ryan Merkley, but it seems like there was a plan for him to not come in. I think one of the fears / good things was actually Martin Jones being bad, really bad for a third year in a row. So maybe that can lead into some positives in terms of like moving a different direction, because with him being so good on the Cup final run and having such a long leash from Doug, obviously it seems like he needed to kind of fail a lot for them to finally move on. So that was kind of one thing. And I think on the youth front too, Nikolai Knizhov coming out of absolutely nowhere to nailing down that bottom pairing role was something that really surprised, I think, a lot of us. Not, those of us that are into prospects too, didn't really see him as a guy that was going to compete too much for that kind of role. And he was just played so well continuously that they just couldn't take him out of the lineup. So that was a really great surprise. And I think it can't be lost in all of this that Evander Kane was an absolute dominant left wing on a very bad team. And he, carried the Sharks in many nights and left them in games they probably shouldn't have been in. So he was just absolutely fantastic for a team that probably didn't deserve as well as he performed. And it's really good to see, especially in a guy, a couple of years into a long contract, that he, didn't just phone it in. He actually excelled. And so I think there were a lot of positives. I think there were definitely some things that we kind of saw coming, like the Martin Jones thing that was kind of a good thing, and some really bright spots like Knizhov just making the defense decision a little bit interesting moving on.
Mm-hmm. Well, Liz, is there a good thing that came out of the season for you, or maybe also one of your worst fears that you realized that came true?
I mean, I'm kind of on the same boat as Victor as far as, we got to see a lot of the younger guys play a lot more this season. Not necessarily quite as much as I would have enjoyed, just based on how the season went. I would have enjoyed if they had a little more of a chance to prove themselves versus a couple games here and there. There were a few guys who got that nightly faith from the team that they got to go out there and show what they could do. But overall, this team was in such a state where I would have enjoyed just seeing more. I mean, as far as the fear goes, I mean, I don't know. There's quite a bit with this team. I think at this point, sticking with the Martin Jones thing, I mean, he's had such an amount of goodwill shown to him at this point.
Yep.
I don't know that I'm on the same boat as Victor, where I think that he's done bad enough where they're going to cut him off just yet. I think he's right on that bubble, and that it'll probably push him over this season, but I don't know that I'm there with it yet.
Well, we're going to talk about that in a minute with the group for sure. Josh, you get the final word on the good that came from the season for you, and then maybe one of the biggest fears that came true for you.
I would say a positive also with the defense was Ferraro. I mean, it was his second year in the league, and he was not that anyone on the defense core was particularly like exceptional, but he had a great season. for a player in their second full NHL season. I think he's 22 now. So that was a pleasant surprise that he was on a top pairing with Brent Burns. I don't think any of us kind of anticipated that level of production. And I think just generally speaking, a lot of the large contracts are just not looking good. And just speaking generally, like Brent Burns, Erik Carlson, especially Mark Scheig, just it's not a good situation. That's like 6, 7, and 5 years left for all those deals. And no movement clauses on 2 of them. So those are going to be not great. And they're already not looking. Like Vlasic was by the end of the season playing on the third pairing, and he was getting outplayed by some of his peers. So it was not good to see that the defense core that's locked down long term is already struggling.
Well, Liz, we'll start with you. Well, let's just go to the elephant in the room and the goaltending. You've already established that you're kind of on the bubble here, but I just kind of wonder. There's a decision that has to be made for Seattle purposes. Jones is obviously there. We talked to Sheng earlier, and we kind of went over, maybe he's exposed to Seattle, maybe he's even bought out. Coronar might be the one who's protected. What do you see? Do you feel like that the Sharks will expose Martin Jones to Seattle here, or what kind of approach do you see going on with this?
I think it partially looks at what they're planning on doing with the offseason and the free agency. If they're planning on trying to go after a goaltender, then I'd say, yeah, they're probably going to leave him exposed just to kind of free up that cap and kind of get a little more, consistency going. If they plan on just kind of going with what they have right now, I don't see them necessarily purposely leaving him unless they absolutely have to. At the moment, which being said, I think they will probably leave him exposed. Will he get taken? My guess is probably not. Not sure Seattle would want to take that on. Yep. It's a little bit more of a risk than I would see from them. However, San Jose might be able to make it a little bit sweeter of a deal for them. They might be able to work it in a, please take him off of our hands.
The good old side deal.
So
it just makes, that's a great point. Could they sweeten it up and maybe offer a draft pick? Take Jones. Here's a draft pick. Whatever. I know lots of teams will talk about that. Liz, quick follow up. Do you feel like that there's anybody that they might try to go after in the offseason in your mind?
Honestly, right now, I'm not entirely sure. I mean, the biggest name I've been following as far as goaltending in the offseason has been Tuukka Rask. Just because there's been so much going on with there. I do believe, though, he has said he doesn't want to play anywhere but Boston.
Correct.
But also, I mean, if Boston doesn't want him back and he wants to keep playing, who knows what's going to happen?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, do they go with the Swayman-Vladar combination in Boston? So, yeah, that'll definitely be something to look at. So, Josh, what about you in the goaltending? Do you feel like Jones is exposed, and is there a candidate or two that you hope they go after?
I'm with Victor that I think Jones is gone. I think they'll leave him unprotected on the off chance that they can get not have to pay much and have him taken. But if you protect Kozhinosh over him, I don't think Ron Francis is even considering taking Jones at this point, just because of how much Seattle's been rumored to want to keep really close to the cap floor to take on salary for assets later.
Mm-hmm.
And then in terms of goaltending free agents, I mean, I know there's a lot available, but I don't know how aggressive Doug Wilson's going to be just because of how bad the team is and how good the 2022 draft class looks. So I think they may go for a free agent, but a similar kind of Dubnyk role, and that they want it to be someone that's older and more experienced, just from how Doug Wilson tends to approach things. So I believe Flock is a free agent. That would be an interesting one. Reimer would be also an interesting one. Mm-hmm. He's a former San Jose Shark legend. So I think some of the older netminders may be one that they take in, have Kozhinosh battle with them, and just have as much time as they can before they have to sign another free agent. Melnichuk does well, or they draft a goalie somewhat soon, possibly in the first round this year.
Yeah, I've wondered that too. Do they look at the two goalies in the top of the first round that are rumored to go. So Victor, give you the final word overall on the goaltending. I think we pretty much know what you think about Jones, but is there a target or two that you think they might try to go after?
Yeah, definitely. I think there are a lot of interesting options, and I think Josh alluded to this. If they can get someone to sign relatively long term that's young-ish, I think they would like to make that happen if they can. But just kind of filling a plug until maybe Melnichuk is ready seems like possible as well. But I think Mrazek is someone who's been talked about a fair amount. I think that might make sense if the money works. Grubauer would be awesome, I think, as well, but it seems like he might demand a little bit more than what they can afford. I think someone like Ranta is really interesting, someone who has generally been kind of good, but such a Band-Aid boy that maybe his stock has fallen and won't cost as much. And when he plays, that might be good. And maybe you can have a 1B to fill in there as well. So there are definitely a lot of interesting options this offseason where I could see them kind of, trying to fill that hole with someone who is hopefully a bit younger, guys like Anderson, some of the older guys that are available, Halak. Not sure how much interest they'll have in them. So that's kind of what I'm thinking. But I also think that I've heard a lot of people say, just take Wallstedt and we can finally solve this problem forever or for at least like a decade, which seems like a reasonable decision as well. Although I think I'd rather have them take Skater.
Will be interesting to see how Wilson handles that one. So if you're just joining us, this is the Hockey Writers Live. We are in our Sharks panel. We have Victor and Liz and Josh joining us, our Sharks writers here at the Hockey Writers. Josh, we're going to start with you on this next one, and we got to talk expansion draft. I mean, kind of taking a look at the Sharks situation, it seems to me that it's pretty obvious who's going to be protected. But unless I'm missing something, I feel like they're short when it comes to the exposure requirements. If there's two forwards that they have to expose, I feel like they have to address that somehow. If you look at Couture, Thomas Hertl, Vander Kane, Timo Meyer, Kevin LeBanc, Rudolph Balcers, and Jonathan Dowling, if we assume that those are the seven, that leaves Dylan Gambrell on the outside. Do you feel like that? I feel like they have to do something about that. Is there something that we should be looking for the Sharks doing to at least get to that minimum exposure?
They still have Donato as a restricted free agent, so he would fill the availability.
And do you feel like, I was going to just follow up with that?
Yeah.
Do you feel like that that's what we can expect to see? Do you agree with that list of forwards being protected like that?
I would. I think just going in a weird direction here. I think there's a world where they can honestly leave Couture available. I don't think he's a positive valued asset with this contract at this point.
Ooh, okay.
There's many players on the Sharks that I don't think are positively valued given the amount of money that they're making. So I think if they're looking to move one, I think that's $8 million in cap space that they need. But I think that set of forwards is the most likely one. I just think it doesn't look too great too with that they traded like a 3rd round pick for Donato just to use him for a year and have him taken. However, there will be teams that lose a much larger asset than Ryan Donato in the expansion draft. I think they're losing a forward. I don't think if they choose to expose Šimik versus Burns will be another topic. I don't think they'll take either just because both seem to have long terms for what their roles are currently.
And Josh dropping the spice saying Logan Couture. That's interesting. Victor, what say you about the expansion draft situation with the Sharks? Who do you think ends up being claimed by Seattle?
I do think it's going to be Donato. I agree. I don't think. I wish Wilson would expose one of the large contracts because I think that would make a whole lot of sense for the team, whether that's Burns, whether that's Couture. I think that would help the team the most because it would protect some of the younger players, give them more flexibility. And then if Seattle takes one of those large contracts, then you have more cap space to deal with. But I seriously doubt that Wilson is going to do that. I think he feels like he wants to keep those veterans on the team and still push for a playoff spot / cup, which I just don't think is realistic. But I think that's what he wants to do. So I think the most realistic thing that's going to happen is that he's going to leave some of those depth forwards like Donato, Gambrell, maybe one of them, maybe Shimmick goes. I think if I were Seattle, I would probably take Donato because he's still youngish and has shown some decent scoring acumen in the league. So that's what I think is most realistic, but not what I would like.
All right, Liz, you get the final word on the expansion draft, and maybe who do you think ends up being claimed by the Kraken?
I mean, I'm kind of glad to hear that we're all on the same page, because I'd also have to say Donato's the most likely for me. I was on the same ground of I would like to see Couture specifically exposed. I think that Seattle could potentially look at him and say, you have that veteran experience that we'd like to have. You have that, leadership experience that we'd like. Do I think that they would go for it? Not necessarily, just because that's a risk for them at this point. I mean, they saw what Vegas did when they came into the league, and I think looking at a guy like Couture, they might kind of sit there and go, maybe not. Maybe that's not the deal we want to make. But, I mean, you never know. Doug could throw something completely random at us that we just weren't expecting. He could leave, he could leave Couture exposed. I also agree. I don't think that looking at Sharks defense right now, it's going to be a defenseman that gets taken. I can't imagine that there are any teams in the league right now who are looking at Sharks defenseman and going, I want him, except for, two guys who very clearly are not going to be exposed. So, I mean, yeah, I think we're just all on the same page with this.
Very good. It's got two more questions for the panel. Victor, we'll start with you. I guess, it seems obvious to me from an outsider's perspective, but, maybe you guys have a little bit more to offer. Is this the end of the Patrick Marlow era once and for all?
I think so. I think that, Doug really wanted him to get the record in the Sharks uniform. I think he has the record now. I think he's been around the young players and shown leadership. And I feel like he wanted to make that happen for him. And he maybe felt like he owed that to him or just thought it would be good for hockey. And at this point, he's definitely lost several steps. And if Doug still thinks he's in the team's in a competing mode, and so I'm not really sure that Patrick helps all that much. So I kind of feel like he won't really feel so inclined to bring him back. Although if in the middle of the season he's not playing like he was this season or early on, doesn't have a contract, I think there's a decent, and if the Sharks are bad, which I expect them to not be great next season, I think Doug might say, okay, come on back and, sign you to a small deal and you can keep playing. But I don't think he starts the team. I don't think he starts out camp with the team.
And Liz, would you agree? What do you think happens with Marlow here?
I agree. I mean, I do think he does come back. If not this season, if they're not performing at the top of the game, I think maybe they bring him back next season even. It'd be kind of odd to see him after a year off, clearly. But he's one of those guys where until he fully commits to, I'm done, I'm not going to come back, I'm not going to play anymore, that option's always going to be open with the team. I think as far as his leadership ability, his influence on the team, he's not playing as well as we'd all like him to be. He's not playing as well as he'd like him to be, but it's always going to be an open window for him. I think he's just one of those guys that, he's going to be welcomed back if he's needed.
Mm-hmm. And Josh, you get the final word on Patrick Marlow.
I'd agree with that. I think I don't think he's returning. I think it's going to be a tricky situation for him because I'm not sure I don't think any team's going to have an active roster spot like on their 12 forward spots available for him. And as a reserve, you technically break his Ironman streak, which just looks really kind of bad. So I think it's a tricky situation. I think Liz was talking earlier about we wanted more young players to step in the lineup, and it seemed at times Marlow was kind of taking that spot from them, whether it be like playing on the third line or even got into the top six at one point. It was frustrating to see young players not given that chance in favor of him. And I think if you're bringing him back, you're still pushing some younger player down that is deserving of an NHL shot.
All right, we saved the best for last. So Liz, we'll start with you on this one, and we're going to give you a chance to be Doug Wilson. So what agenda items would you do that you would prioritize for this season to put the Sharks in a position to make a run at the playoffs?
I mean, the easy answer is goaltending. Focus on your goaltending situation right now. It's a mess. Everyone knows it's a mess. You look at it, you can't deny it. The secondary thing I think for me would be defense. Get your blue line to where it needs to be. You have a couple guys, but a couple guys in this league is not going to be good enough. Maybe in the division, you might be able to get away with it sometimes. As far as the conference, the league, going on a cup run, any sort of playoff run even, it's not going to cut it. So I think that's definitely where you're going to start, is in goal and then on the blue line.
All right, Josh, what would you do?
A lot of things seem to be changed. One thing that's really interesting, I'm pretty sure only 2 teams in the normal Pacific have a winning record this year. So it's not completely out of the realm of possibility, but there's so many things that need to get fixed. I think in addition to that, there's a huge hole at third line center. Like there's Hurdle, there's Couture, and then there's kind of no offense. So I think addressing third line center also needs to get done. I'm somewhat optimistic with the blue line that if Knizhov and Ferraro can be better in the roles that they had last season in the top 4, the defense can be somewhat better. A Shimmick classic bottom pairing is very expensive and not great, but if you're using it in very limited minutes, I think it's possible. And with the money that you're going to possibly free up from buying out Jones, I think you save $3-ish million this year. You can sign some veteran goalie that will either hopefully be league average-ish, if not push Kozhinosh to be hopefully better than what he showed this season in a little bit of experience.
All right, Victor, you get the last word of the night and the path that you want the Sharks to take in the offseason.
I mean, I agree that there is a lot that needs to be addressed. So I agree with what my co-writers have said, but I think that one of the biggest things that's been exposed since Pavelski left is the center depth. I think that you can make up a lot of deficiencies if you're strong down the middle and you can drive play to the other team's zone. And that just hasn't happened. And they've tried a bunch of different options, younger players in the 3 and 4C, and it just hasn't worked. I think they need to bring someone in that can stabilize that. There's a lot of interesting free agents this offseason, guys that are kind of unlikely, like Krejci and Getzlaf would be kind of fun. Someone like Sam Reinhart would be an amazing pull if he actually does play center. But I think a more realistic option is someone like Phil Deneau, who's an excellent two-way center, could really help support what Couture and Hurdle are doing. Guys like Granlund and Stastny and Bozak or some other options. So I think, the money has to work, obviously, but I think if you could get one of those guys at a reasonable cap hit, and of course it goes back to what we said before in terms of buying out Jones, if you have more money to play with, then I think you could get one of those higher end guys and it could be a really nice fit. So I think the center depth definitely needs to be addressed in addition to the goaltending.
Well, this has been very excellent by all 3 of you, Victor, Liz, Josh. Thank you so very much for joining us in the Hockey Writers Live. And fans, make sure you follow all 3 of them. They're out on Twitter. They're constantly producing Sharks content for you. So just do them a favor, hit that follow button on Twitter. Guys, thank you very much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And fans, thank you for joining us again. Another episode of Hockey Writers Live done in the books. Hope you all have a great week. We plan on being back next week. Probably I'm thinking we're going to do either Anaheim or the Kings, or it's kind of a similar show where we might go the whole time and looking at them, because look, that whole Pacific division, look, the Sharks, the Kings, the Ducks, they're all going to be very interesting to watch in the offseason for different reasons, and we want to get to the bottom of what might happen. So thanks for your time. Hope you have a great night, and we'll see you next week here on the Hockey Writers Live.